Hello, my beautiful family. I'm Mr. Harry, and if this is your first time here, welcome home. You've just found a place where every story is written with heart and every wound is treated with love. Before we begin, I cover you in this prayer. May peace kiss your pain. May hope find you where you thought it never would. And if this story touches even a corner of your soul, like it. Comment with your heart. And please, don't leave without subscribing. Not for me, but for the part of you that still believes in second chances. Let's begin. She never meant to do it all alone. But when the world turned its back, she didn't cry for help. She simply became stronger. Her name was Emma Carter. And for 12 years, she'd been the kind of mother you don't read about in news headlines, but the kind you remember because love lived in her every action. Monday morning, 6:30 a.m., coffee brewing, lunchbox packed, shoes by the door. She moved through her tiny kitchen like a ballet dancer, practiced, precise, exhausted. Not because she wanted praise, but because a boy was waiting for her love on the other side of that bedroom door. Wake up, superstar. Today's a big day. Aiden Carter blinked slowly. 12 years old, shy, quiet, with the kind of eyes that noticed everything, and lips that often said nothing. Is it okay if I'm scared? He asked. Emma smiled, smoothing down his cowlick with gentle fingers. It's okay to be scared, baby. That just means you're about to do something brave. She was a single mother, not by choice, but by circumstance. And for 12 years, she'd built a life from scratch. One lunchbox, one job, one whispered bedtime story at a time. There were nights she worked until sunrise, nights she fell asleep beside his crib with her shoes still on. There were days she had to choose between groceries and rent. But Aiden never knew that. To him, his mother was magic. It was his first day at a new school, a better district, a scholarship slot, all because Emma had filled out an application on her only day off. She reached across the passenger seat and squeezed his hand. Whatever happens today, know this. You are enough. Just as you are. He nodded, still nervous. She watched him walk toward the gates. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, not with fear, but with the weight of every single choice she'd made to get him here. There were no family photos in their home, no framed memories of young love or wedding days. Emma had erased the past, carefully, completely. Because the man who helped bring Aiden into this world was never supposed to return, and certainly not in a classroom. But fate doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives, unannounced, uninvited, and always right on time. Aiden Carter had always been the quiet one, the kind of boy who sat near the window and listened more than he spoke, who observed people like puzzles and found comfort in silence. So when he stepped into his new classroom that Tuesday morning, he did what he always did. He stayed small, stayed still, and hoped the world wouldn't ask too much of him. The classroom smelled like whiteboard markers and fresh paper, desks in neat rows, sunlight pouring through tall windows. And at the front of the room, a man stood writing something on the board in clean, practiced strokes. Mr. Bennett, Language Arts. His voice, when he greeted the students, was warm but firm. Welcome, everyone. Today's not just the first day of school, it's the first page of your new story. Let's write it well. Aiden looked up, and in that moment, Daniel Bennett forgot how to breathe. It hit him like a whisper in the ribs, a glimpse, a flicker, a mirror from another life. The boy in the third row, second seat from the left, he had Emma's eyes. And not just her eyes, but something else. A stillness, a quiet strength, the kind of presence Daniel hadn't seen in over a decade. He blinked, shook it off, tried to stay professional. But his hands trembled slightly as he handed out the syllabus. It wasn't until after class, when the last student had filed out, that Daniel walked to his desk and pulled up the student roster. He scanned quickly until he found the name, Aiden Carter. Guardian, Emma Carter. His world tilted. Emma. He hadn't said that name in years, not out loud. He hadn't needed to. It lived just beneath the surface of every what-if he'd ever tried to bury. They'd been young once, wild with ideas and promises, college sweethearts who swore they'd change the world together. She was studying nursing. He was planning to teach. And then one letter changed everything. He'd been accepted into a graduate program overseas, a fast-track teaching fellowship in Tokyo. She'd said she was proud. He'd asked her to wait. And then, silence. A letter that never came. Or maybe it did. Maybe it was lost. Or maybe fate decided they weren't meant to last. He never heard from her again. And now here he was, 12 years later, looking at a student roster with her name on it, and a boy who looked just like both of them. Daniel leaned back in his chair, heart thudding against his ribs. Is he? He couldn't finish the question, because deep down he already knew the answer. Some truths don't need paperwork or paternity tests. Sometimes you just know. Outside the window, the schoolyard buzzed with the noise of lunch and laughter. But inside room 3B, Daniel Bennett sat frozen, caught between past and present, between the woman he lost and the boy who might be his son. And somewhere, not far from that classroom, Emma Carter had no idea that the past she'd buried had just stepped back into her son's life. Emma Carter had always known this day might come. But knowing something and standing face to face with it were two entirely different things. It happened in the middle of a hallway, fluorescent lights overhead, teachers passing by, students laughing just around the corner. She was delivering Aiden's medical forms to the front office, minding her own quiet world, when she looked up and saw him. Daniel. 12 years disappeared in a heartbeat. Time didn't slow, it stopped. Her body stilled, her breath caught, and every cell inside her screamed, no, no, not here, not now. He was older, more filled out. His hair was shorter, face sharper, eyes somehow softer, and sadder all at once, but it was him, no doubt, no question. And in that same heartbeat, he saw her too. Their eyes locked across 20 feet of polished tile. And just for a second, less than a second, Emma saw everything she'd once loved. His shoulders, once slouched and uncertain, now stood tall. His hands, once always in motion, now still. But his eyes hadn't changed. They were still the same storm-colored blue that had once told her she was the center of his universe. Then it passed. She turned her face away, pretended not to see him, and kept walking. Not because she was strong, but because she wasn't. Not anymore. She could still feel the echo of his last words all those years ago. I'll write you from Tokyo. I promise. But the letter never came. The promise broke. And so did her heart. She had waited. God, she had waited weeks, months, sitting by the mailbox, holding her breath at every unfamiliar phone call. She had cried into pillows and prayed into darkness. Then the morning sickness started. And she knew she was going to be a mother, alone. She wrote him a letter, poured her heart into it, told him about the baby, about her fear, about how she would still love him if he chose to come back. She even included an ultrasound picture. She never got a reply. That was the day she stopped hoping. That was the day she changed her phone number, moved back home, and began building a world where the name Daniel Bennett would never be spoken again. Until now. Until her son came home and casually mentioned, "My new teacher's name is Mr. Bennett," and her blood turned cold. Emma sat alone in her car that night, long after Aiden had gone to sleep, the engine off, the keys in her lap, and her hands shaking in silence. Her past was in the same building as her child. Her past had looked into Aiden's eyes, the same eyes that once stared up at her from a crib. And Emma knew, he had to. Some things you just feel. in the curve of a jawline, in the way a child tilts his head. Daniel was a stranger to Aiden, but Aiden was Daniel's reflection. And now Emma faced the question she had never prepared for. What if he came back? What if he wanted to know the boy he never knew existed? What if Aiden wanted to know him too? She had spent 12 years protecting her son. 12 years telling herself that Aiden didn't need a man who'd walked away. That they were enough. Just the two of them, just us two. But now, just us two was no longer a promise. It was a question, one she didn't know how to answer. He waited until the last bell rang, until the final student had left the building, and the afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Daniel stood beside her car, hands in his pockets, heart pounding like it was his first day of school all over again. Emma saw him from a distance, and for a second she considered walking the other way. Pretending again. Hiding behind motherhood and grocery lists and all the pieces of a life she'd built without him. But something inside her whispered, no more running. She stopped a few feet away, crossed her arms, didn't smile, didn't blink. He looked at her like she was a memory he wasn't sure he deserved to remember. Emma, he said softly. Is he mine? There it was. 12 years of silence, shattered by 5 words. The question he never asked, the question she never thought he'd have the right to ask. Her mouth was dry, her knees were weak. But her voice was steel. You don't get to ask me that, she said. Not now, not after all this time. I didn't know. His voice cracked. I never got your letter. She shook her head, the hurt rising. Too fast, too sharp. Don't lie, Daniel, I sent it. I poured my heart into it. I told you everything. And you disappeared. I didn't disappear, he said, stepping closer. I waited. Every day I waited for you to call, to write. I thought you moved on. I was pregnant, she said flatly, with your child. The silence hit harder than the words. Daniel took a step back, like the truth had punched him in the chest. He ran a hand through his hair, looking toward the ground like it might offer answers the sky never had. My God, he whispered. All this time. Emma folded her arms tighter. You don't get to be shocked. You don't get to feel anything right now. I did this. I carried him. I raised him. I wiped every tear. I held him through every fever, every nightmare. You weren't there, Daniel. I was. I would have been, he said, barely breathing. If I had known. But you didn't, she cut in. And now you do. They stared at each other for a long, bitter second. The wind moved softly through the parking lot, whispering through the trees above. She wanted to cry, she wanted to scream, but most of all, she wanted to protect the one person who mattered more than anything in the world. I'm not here to take anything from you, he said, his voice gentler now. I saw him, and I knew. Emma turned to unlock her car, her hands trembling. I don't know what you want, Daniel, but you can't just walk back into our lives like nothing happened. I don't want nothing, he said. I want to earn something. Aiden, he's my son. She spun around, eyes flashing. He is my son. You don't get to say that. You don't get to claim him because you feel guilty. I'm not here out of guilt, he said. I'm here because I've never felt anything so deeply in my life. Emma blinked, and for the first time, the tears made it past her defenses. You have no idea what it cost me to raise him alone. Daniel stepped forward, his voice raw. Then let me carry some of that weight now, please. But before she could answer, they both heard it, the soft sound of footsteps behind them. They turned. Aiden stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide, face pale. You're my dad? The question wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It fell between them like a stone dropped in a still lake, ripples of truth spreading in all directions. Emma couldn't breathe. Daniel couldn't speak. And Aiden, he just stood there in the space between past and future, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him the truth. He didn't yell, he didn't cry, he just asked the question like he was asking the weather, like he already knew the answer and was only giving the adults a chance to admit it. "You're my dad?" Daniel's heart stopped. Emma's world cracked open. There are moments in life that change everything, not with noise but with silence. And in that silence, a 12-year-old boy stood between two people who had once loved each other with everything they had and lost each other with even more. Aiden looked at Emma. His eyes, her eyes, searching for confirmation, for safety, for truth. "Mum?" Her mouth opened, closed. She'd prepared for this moment in 1,000 ways in her mind. But in none of them was he standing there, staring at her with those soft, betrayed eyes. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Emma stepped toward him gently. "Because I was trying to protect you." "From what?" Aiden asked. "From him?" He turned to Daniel now, his tone colder than it had ever been. "You knew?" Daniel shook his head quickly. "I didn't. Not until this week. I swear, Aiden, I didn't know." "But you're my teacher," Aiden said, voice trembling. "You looked right at me, and you didn't say anything." "Because I wasn't sure," Daniel whispered. "And I didn't want to hurt you, or your mum." Aiden looked at both of them, the woman who had always been his safe place, and the man who suddenly looked like him in all the ways that now made sense. He took a step back. "I need to go home." Emma moved toward him, but Aiden stepped around her. "I just need to think." He walked away without another word, backpack dragging behind him, shoulders heavy with the kind of weight no child should have to carry. Emma didn't follow. Daniel didn't move. They both stood in the parking lot, hearts breaking for the same boy, but from different distances, different regrets. After a long silence, Daniel said, "He's incredible." Emma nodded slowly, voice hollow. "He's my whole world." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "He looks like you when he's mad." "He looks like you when he's quiet," she replied. And somehow that truth made it hurt even more. The sun dipped lower behind the school building, casting long shadows across the asphalt, the kind that stretch when something is being pulled apart. Daniel finally spoke again. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't," Emma said. "This isn't something you fix. It's something you show up for, every day, whether he forgives you or not." Daniel nodded, understanding more than she realized. "Then I'll show up." She looked at him, tired, guarded, uncertain, but for the first time since she'd seen him again, she didn't look away. "You don't get to break his heart like you broke mine." "I won't," Daniel said. "I swear." "Then prove it." They stood in the quiet after the storm, surrounded by things unsaid, and one child walking home, trying to understand how a stranger suddenly looked like the missing piece of a puzzle he never knew had a hole. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Bennett realized that being a father wasn't something you became because of biology. It was something you earned, one hard moment at a time. That night, Emma sat on the floor of her closet, surrounded by boxes she hadn't opened in years. Dust-covered memories, cardboard coffins for old hopes. She dug through them like a woman looking for air at the bottom of the ocean. And then she found it. The envelope was yellowed with time, the ink slightly faded, but her handwriting still clear. Daniel Bennett, no return address, no stamp, no postmark, because she never mailed it. 12 years ago she wrote that letter, pregnant, heartbroken, scared. She'd sat at her mother's kitchen table, her hand shaking as she wrote the words that tore her in half. "Daniel, I'm pregnant." She told him everything. How she still loved him. How she didn't want to do it alone, but would if she had to. How she believed in the man he said he wanted to be, She even tucked the first ultrasound photo inside. He had tiny hands then, like flower buds waiting to bloom. She'd sealed the envelope, pressed it to her lips, and told herself she'd send it in the morning, but she never did. Because the next day, she saw a photo of Daniel on a fellowship announcement, smiling, surrounded by new friends in Tokyo. And in that moment, she convinced herself he had moved on, that her letter would be an interruption, a burden, an echo from a chapter he had already closed. So she buried it, just like she buried his name. But tonight, staring at that unopened envelope, Emma realized something far harder to admit than anger or pain. She was the one who chose silence. The truth didn't make Daniel innocent, but it made her less certain, less sure that she'd done the right thing. And it broke something inside her to realize that the man she'd hated all these years might have never had a chance to be there. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat in his car in the school parking lot, long after everyone had left. He hadn't meant to stay that long, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Not yet. The classroom was dark behind the windows, the desks were empty, and the ghost of his son's voice still echoed in his head. "You looked right at me, and you didn't say anything." Daniel rested his head on the steering wheel. 12 years of life, gone. The first time Aiden laughed, the first steps, the first time he got sick and clung to his mother's shirt, crying for someone who wasn't there. Daniel hadn't just missed milestones, he'd missed moments, the small, ordinary, sacred moments that fathers are supposed to collect like treasure. And now he was just a stranger trying to ask for a map back to a life he never knew he had. He didn't want revenge, didn't want guilt to make the rules. He just wanted a chance to be there, in whatever way Aiden would allow. The next day, Daniel returned to school early. There was an envelope sitting on his desk. No name, no note, just old paper, sealed and fragile. He opened it carefully, read the letter once, then again. And by the third time, the tears blurred the ink. It was Emma's handwriting. It was the letter. And inside the ultrasound photo, a tiny blur of life, his life. Daniel pressed the picture against his heart and let the grief finally come. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that lives in your chest and breathes when you do. The kind that doesn't leave. That afternoon, he waited outside the building. When Emma walked up, he didn't speak right away. He just held out the photo, gently, reverently. "I should have fought harder for you," he said. "Even without a letter, even without a clue, I should have looked for you." Emma looked down. "I should have sent it." They stood in the stillness of shared guilt, both holding pieces of a past neither could undo. "But you didn't," she said, "and I didn't, so here we are." "Yeah," he whispered. "Here we are." And somehow just saying it, together, made the pain feel a little less lonely. Daniel didn't come with grand speeches. He didn't show up with flowers or apologies wrapped in ribbon. He came with presence and patience. And he came every day. He started small, dropping off a book Aiden had once mentioned liking, leaving it in the classroom with a sticky note that simply read, "Page 103 is my favorite. What's yours?" D. He volunteered to help with the school's reading club. He stayed after class to stack chairs, helped students with their essays, and asked Aiden, gently, if he'd like help on his science project. Aiden didn't say much, not at first, but he didn't walk away either. One afternoon, Daniel found a new, sticky note in the book he'd left. It read, "Page 76 is the best." That's when the character decides to stop being scared. That night, Daniel cried for the first time in weeks, because it wasn't just a page number, it was an invitation. He started showing up in little ways that mattered big, bringing Aiden's favorite snack when the cafeteria forgot, walking him to the bus stop when Emma was stuck on a shift, teaching him how to ride a bike in the empty lot behind the school. And when Aiden fell and scraped his knee, Daniel knelt beside him, held his breath, and waited. Aiden looked up at him, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "It's okay. You don't have to leave." Daniel didn't move. He just nodded and said softly, "I'm not going anywhere." Emma watched it all from a distance. She saw the moments when Daniel made Aiden laugh. That unfiltered, belly-deep laugh she hadn't heard in months. She saw the way he carried Aiden's backpack without being asked. How he showed up early, stayed late, and never once tried to force his way into their lives. She didn't say anything at first, but she noticed, and noticing turned into watching, watching turned into wondering, and wondering turned into hoping, because something in Daniel's eyes had changed. The same man who once chased ambition across the globe now seemed more grounded, more real. He wasn't here for control, he was here for connection. And it wasn't just Emma seeing it. It was Aiden too. One night at dinner, Aiden pushed his peas around his plate and said quietly, "He asked me if I wanted to go to the museum this weekend. Just to hang out." Emma set her fork down. "Do you want to?" Aiden shrugged. But then he said something she wasn't ready for. "I think I want to see who he is when he's not my teacher." And Emma realized her son wasn't asking for permission. He was asking for space to make his own choice. So she nodded. "Okay, just promise me you'll tell me how it goes." Aiden smiled. "Just a little. I promise." That weekend, Daniel took Aiden to the Natural History Museum. They spent 3 hours just wandering, laughing, looking. Daniel told him stories about dinosaurs, space travel, and the books that changed his life as a kid. They ate hot dogs on the museum steps, and for the first time in forever, Aiden asked a question Daniel had waited years to hear. "Do you think we could do this again sometime?" Daniel didn't speak right away. He looked at his son, really looked at him and said, "I don't want to do this just sometime. I want to do it as often as you'll let me." Aiden nodded. "Okay, but next time, you're buying ice cream." Daniel laughed. "Deal." Later that night, Emma heard the key turn in the front door. Aiden walked in, his face soft and tired, but peaceful in a way she hadn't seen since everything changed. He dropped his backpack, hugged her longer than usual, and said, "It was a good day." She brushed his curls away from his eyes and smiled. "I'm glad." He went to his room, and the apartment fell quiet. But a few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Emma opened it and found Daniel standing there with 2 coffees. "No expectations," he said gently. "Just thank you for trusting me with him today." Emma didn't invite him in, but she took the coffee, and she didn't close the door right away. Sometimes grace begins that small. The weather had shifted. The air wasn't cold anymore, just soft, the kind of breeze that carries old memories like perfume. Emma found herself standing by the kitchen window more often now, watching, listening, waiting, though she'd never admit it aloud. Aiden had started calling Daniel after dinner. Just casual things, homework help, science questions, jokes he didn't feel like explaining to her. And Emma, she let him. She watched the door when Daniel dropped him off after their weekend visits. Sometimes she waved, sometimes she didn't. But she always noticed. One afternoon, she saw them in the backyard through the kitchen window. Daniel and Aiden tossing a football, laughing, like no time had been lost. Like this had always been their rhythm. And for the first time, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to see before. Peace. It didn't look loud or dramatic. It didn't come with fireworks or music swelling in the background. It just looked like a boy laughing with his father. And a man who never stopped looking at his son like he was a miracle. Emma stepped out onto the porch that evening as Daniel walked Aiden up the path. "Did you have fun?" she asked casually. Aiden nodded. "He taught me how to throw a spiral." Daniel smiled. "He's a natural." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Careful, you'll inflate his ego." "Too late," Daniel grinned. "He already told me he could beat me in chess and arm wrestling." Aiden laughed and ran inside to grab water. Emma and Daniel were left in the golden silence of early evening. He cleared his throat. I didn't want to say this in front of him, but thank you for letting me in. Emma crossed her arms, half defense, half comfort. I didn't do it for you. I know, he said softly, but it still matters. She studied him for a long moment. You know I used to hate you. He nodded. I know that too. I blamed you for everything, she added. For the loneliness, for the struggle, for the fear. I carried all of it for years. And you didn't deserve to, he said, no defensiveness in his voice. I can't take back what I missed, Emma, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes drifted toward the house, where laughter echoed faintly from Aiden's room. Then she looked back at Daniel. Do you remember what you said to me the night before you left for Tokyo? She asked. He smiled sadly. I said, we'll write our own story when I get back. Emma nodded. I waited for that story. For a long time. So did I, he whispered. They stood in the quiet, the weight of 12 years between them, and something new building in the spaces where the pain used to live. Not love, not yet, but something real, something warm, something that didn't feel like fear. She took a slow breath and said, I'm not asking for anything. He looked her in the eye. Neither am I. Then what do you want? Daniel exhaled, the truth steady in his voice. I just want to show up. Not for who we were, but for who we are now. Emma tilted her head, studying him. The man he used to be was gone. This man, the one standing here with humility and hope, he was someone different. She didn't smile, but she didn't close the door either. Instead, she said, I make dinner around 6. If you're around, we usually have leftovers. Daniel blinked. I'll be around. She turned to go inside but paused in the doorway. I still hate that you missed his first steps. I hate that too, he said quietly. And his first word? What was it? Emma smiled to herself. Books. Daniel laughed under his breath. Of course it was. Emma didn't turn around. She just said, be on time. And for the first time in 12 years, Daniel Bennett felt like maybe, just maybe, the door wasn't closing. It was opening. Slowly, carefully, but it was opening. Daniel stopped counting the days, because it no longer felt like showing up. It felt like living. He came over for dinner twice a week, sat at the table like a guest at first, then slowly, like something more permanent. He washed the dishes without being asked, replaced the broken porch light, started keeping peanut butter in his car, because Aiden always forgot his sandwich on field trip days. He wasn't trying to make up for lost time. He knew better than that. Time, once past, does not rewind, but hearts can, if you're patient enough. One Sunday afternoon, Aiden came out of his room with a box in his hands. What's that? Daniel asked. My rocket set, Aiden said. I've never built one before. Daniel blinked. You want to build it? Together? Aiden shrugged. I mean, unless you're too busy. Daniel smiled. I've been waiting 12 years to get that invitation. They spent hours on the floor, plastic parts scattered like stardust across the carpet. Daniel let Aiden lead, offering help when asked, stepping back when not. They talked about space, stars, how far things can travel without breaking. Daniel wanted to say, like us, but he didn't. Some truths don't need to be said when they're being lived. Later, when Emma walked in and saw them, side by side, tools in hand, laughing, she didn't interrupt. She leaned against the doorway and watched as her son became lighter, more whole, as if some unspoken part of him had been waiting for this puzzle piece to slide into place. That night, when Aiden went to bed, he hugged Daniel without being prompted. Thanks, Dad. he mumbled into his shoulder. Daniel froze, not out of shock, but out of reverence. He didn't reply right away, he just hugged him tighter. "Anytime, son." The next week, Daniel attended his first parent-teacher conference as Aiden's father. He brought a notebook, asked thoughtful questions, and took notes like he was preparing for a final exam on fatherhood. Emma sat beside him, arms loosely folded, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "You're taking this pretty seriously," she whispered. Daniel leaned closer. "He's the most important thing I've ever studied." They both laughed, quietly, but with ease. Later that night, as they left the building, Emma slowed her steps. "I've been thinking," she said. Daniel looked over. "Dangerous." She rolled her eyes. "Shut up." He grinned. "Okay, sorry. What have you been thinking?" She stopped walking. "About how it took you 12 years to show up, but only a few months to become what he needed all along." Daniel's smile faded into something more sincere. "He deserved better. You did too." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Yeah, but maybe we're getting better now." He didn't push the moment. He didn't reach for her hand. He just nodded. "Then I'll keep showing up, as long as you let me." She didn't answer, but when they reached the car, she handed him a thermos of coffee and said, "For the morning. You're taking him to practice, right?" Daniel took it, smiled, and said what he'd been waiting years to mean with his whole heart. "Always." And somewhere, deep in the quiet between night and morning, a boy slept peacefully, knowing that both of his parents were in his corner now, that he was no longer divided by time or absence or silence, that maybe he had the father he deserved. 1 year later, the auditorium buzzed with nervous laughter and polished shoes on hardwood floors. Parents lined the back rows, holding bouquets and blinking away camera flashes. On stage, a row of middle schoolers shifted in their seats, waiting for their names to be called. Aiden sat near the middle, pressed shirt, slightly crooked tie, fingers tapping the armrest. His name would be called soon. He'd be walking across the stage to accept the principal's award for academic excellence. But that's not what made his heart race. It was who was in the front row. Emma sat on the left, hands clasped in her lap. Daniel sat on the right, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers, Aiden's favorite. Between them was one empty seat. Aiden had insisted on it, so they'd sit together, just not too close, a quiet sign that some spaces need time. And that's okay. When Aiden's name was called, the applause rose like a wave. Emma stood first, Daniel stood next, both smiling, both clapping, both proud. And Aiden walked across the stage with a calmness in his chest that hadn't been there the year before. He knew who he was now, not just a boy raised by a strong mother, not just a kid who used to wonder about the missing piece of his family. He was Aiden Carter, son of Emma, student of Mr. Bennett, and a boy finally seen, fully loved, and no longer caught between what was lost and what had been found. After the ceremony, they took a photo together, the three of them. No one said anything special. No dramatic speeches. Just smiles. Later that evening, Daniel brought out a folder. Inside were drawings Aiden had made over the last year. The first time he and his dad went to the museum, their rocket launch, game night with burnt popcorn. At the back was a short essay titled "Who I Admire." It read, "I used to think being strong meant doing everything alone, but now I think strength is when you let people in. My mum is the bravest person I know, and my dad is the reason I believe in second chances." Daniel handed the paper to Emma, but she didn't read it right away. She just held it against her chest and nodded. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Daniel replied. "Just keep letting me show up." She looked at him. No walls this time, no fear. Just a tired, grateful woman who had fought for too long and was finally letting herself rest beside someone who wouldn't walk away. "You're not the same person you were 12 years ago," she said softly. "No," Daniel said. "And neither are you." She smiled. "That's a good thing." That night, as the lights went out and the house grew quiet, Aiden looked out his window and saw Daniel's car pulling away, slow, steady, headlights fading into the dusk. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel left behind, he felt carried, because sometimes the people who disappear do come back, sometimes letters get found, hearts reopen, and stories, the really good ones, don't end when something breaks, they begin when something heals. My dear family, if you've ever lost time, or love, or a version of yourself you thought was gone forever, I hope this story reminded you. Some things do come back. Not perfect, not the same, but whole, in a different way. If this story touched your heart, tell me. Leave a comment, even just one word. Subscribe, not just to the channel, but to hope, to healing, to the kind of love that doesn't knock loud, but waits at the door. I'm Mr. Harry, and until the next story, stay kind, stay soft, and don't stop believing that even the broken things can become beautiful again.